I'd like to welcome our witnesses this morning to bring us a perspective on the industry's perspective on audit readiness. Over the past 4 months, we've heard from a variety of witnesses within government, including representatives from the Office of OSD and Military Department Controllers, the Department of Defense Functional Communities, Department Office of Inspector General, and the GAO on the challenges that the department faces in achieving audit readiness and its efforts to resolve these issues. Today, as the panel nears the completion of its work, we turn to accounting firms that have experience out of the private sector, as well as within government, to get their views on the impediments to DoD achieving auditability and the actions needed to address these challenges. In addition to having experience performing work at various other entities, these firms are involved in almost every aspect of the department's financial improvement and audit readiness efforts, ranging from assisting DoD components in implementing the fire strategy to assisting the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller in performing its review of DoD's components' progress and actually performing certain audits themselves. Therefore, they can provide a well-informed point of view on the problems facing DoD as it works toward achieving auditability on the Statement of Budgetary Resources by 2014 and full financial statements by 2017. Some of the challenges that have been identified to date, including sustaining leadership and effective oversight, ensuring workforce competency and implementing the ERPs, solving long-standing internal control weaknesses, and managing organizational challenges associated with having a large and complex organization such as DoD. The witnesses here today may or may not consider all these issues as impediments to improving financial management audit readiness, or they may have slightly different take on the issues, or they may identify other challenges altogether. Most significantly, they may be able to provide alternative options on how to overcome these weaknesses. Look forward to hearing their testimony. I'd now like to introduce our witnesses. We've got Ms. Joanne Botel, partner with Deloitte & Touche, Ms. Tracy Porter, partner with Grant Thornton, and Mr. Mark Healy, partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now I'd like to turn to Rob Andrews for any opening statement he'd like to make.
Well, good morning, Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to have you with us. I will repeat something I said as we've gone forward in this process, that we're on the verge of making very consequential decisions about the defense budget, either by default through the sequestration process or through a more deliberative mechanism through the special committee. But one way or another, there's big decisions ahead. And one thing I think that we all understand is that bad data lead to bad decisions, and bad record-keeping systems lead to bad data. And it's an unfortunate presumption that the present state of affairs, because we do not have accurate financial statements from the Department of Defense, give us too much bad data. So this whole project is really not about some, metaphysical accounting exercise, with all due respect to the chairman. Don't want to insult accountants, but it's about a much larger and more substantive problem, which is are we going to make these very consequential decisions with good information or without good information? And I'm encouraged by much of what I've heard from the Department of Defense and the services and the various subunits of the services that are responsible for making us audit ready by the statutory deadline. But that's only half of the equation. I've been looking forward to this morning because it's the other half of the equation. We've been hearing from the people who are going to be preparing to be audited. We're now going to hear from the people who will be doing the audits and get your perspective on the audit readiness and the steps that stand between us and being totally audit ready. So we're glad that you're here. The spirit of this panel has always been to try to take information and use it in the best way possible, and we're glad that you're here to give us some of that information that we can use. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony.
Thanks, Rob. Ms. Botel, your opening statement, and without objection, all your statements will be entered into the record. Your written statements will be entered into the record.
Thank you. Chairman Conaway, Congressman Andrews, and members of the panel, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I have had the unique experience over the last 26 years serving in both government and now industry. Prior to joining Deloitte in 2004, I worked as the Deputy Chief Financial Officer at DoD, and before that at the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. While serving as the DCFO, I recognized the managerial challenges caused by issues with the integrity of DoD financial data and led efforts to improve financial statements, business processes, and systems. It is from this experience that I offer my perspective on two areas which I think are critical to DoD's achieving auditability. First, an increase in sustained leadership commitment, and second, a workforce with the applicable financial and technical competencies. I will talk about leadership first. A commitment from DoD leadership starting at the Secretary's level is critical to achieve audit readiness by 2017. This belief comes from Deloitte's direct experience working with both commercial and government clients. The Chief Financial Officer in the DoD financial management community has demonstrated leadership in addressing the tough issues of fixing the department's business processes and systems. However, the business owners must also be held accountable to correct deficiencies that impact the department's ability to achieve their audit goals. Cross-functional ownership at the senior levels cannot be forced by the CFO, who is a peer to many of the business leaders. This is a job for the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary with tangible and measurable objectives. Secretary Panetta's recent announcement that he is now personally involved in driving the department to achieve audit readiness is a major signal that this is a top priority of the department. However, sustained participation from the Secretary and Deputy Secretary is critical to reinforcing the message throughout the department that auditability is a top priority. Let me provide an example where a director of an agency became personally involved in achieving auditability. The Defense Information Systems Agency, or DISA, started on a journey in 2005 to obtain an audit opinion on its financial statements. The DISA director and others in leadership became personally involved and actively drove the audit readiness efforts. And recently, DISA successfully completed an audit of their working capital fund. The ongoing involvement of the DISA director was a major factor in their success. Deloitte has seen similar examples in recent years on the commercial side where corporate CEOs and COOs aggressively led the implementation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. These organizations quickly learned that success required the full engagement of senior executives, not only in finance, but in the business units. A similar pattern of sustained leadership engagement is critical to the department's ability to meet its aggressive audit readiness timelines. Now let me address the second critical area for success, the need to improve the competencies of the DoD workforce. Workforce development relating to financial management within the DoD should include three areas. First, there are the people who are directly involved in the preparation of the department's financial statements. There should be an increased effort to hire CPAs into these key positions and also to incentivize current qualified employees to take the CPA exam. Second, there are those non-financial managers who in the course of their daily jobs conduct activities that result in a financial transaction. Not all of these people need to be trained accountants, but they need to be trained to understand their role in financial management and why controls and timely processing of financial transactions are important to the integrity of the financial data. Third, there are those financial managers in DoD who are directly involved in the financial statement audit and audit readiness process. Leading these efforts requires CPAs with experience in complex financial statement audits. Getting to the first audit opinion is the most difficult step, and meeting the need for experienced audit professionals is critical to help DoD focus their resources most effectively. The DoD does not have a sufficient number of CPAs with this experience. Since coming to Deloitte and working directly with seasoned audit practitioners, I have come to appreciate the difference between knowing how the department processes and accounts for financial and budgetary transactions and knowing how to audit these transactions. DoD needs to recognize this difference. In conclusion, DoD and its industry partners share the same goal, for DoD to achieve an unqualified audit opinion and for them to meet their deadlines. I want to thank the panel for holding these important hearings on defense financial management and for your laser-focused attention on this very important issue. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. Ms. Porter.
Chairman Conaway, Ranking Member Andrews, and distinguished members of the panel, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to testify today. I'm pleased to be able to share with you my perspective on the impediments to DoD achieving audit readiness. and the actions DoD needs to take to become audit ready. As you know, Grant Thornton was recently retained to perform the audit of the Statement of Budgetary Resources of the United States Marine Corps. The results of that audit aren't the subject of my testimony today. Instead, my views have been formed through years of conducting audits and audit readiness engagements for the federal government. I know for some, audit readiness at DoD may seem like a struggle that will not soon be won, but I've seen significant changes in recent past, including a much stronger focus on improving financial management, and not simply because of the audit. Instead, there's a strong and sincere desire at DoD to give defense managers and warfighters better financial information with which to make their business decisions. Improving financial management is the ultimate goal of auditing the financial statements, but the road to an unqualified opinion is often rocky. Too often, organizations and their stakeholders have unrealistic expectations about the results of early audits. Some of the expectations may derive from the term audit readiness. When laymen hear the term audit readiness, they may assume it means an organization is likely to obtain an unqualified opinion on its financial statements. It often means, however, that the organization simply has enough evidence ready to subject to the scrutiny of auditors, even though the result may be a qualified opinion or even a disclaimer. The past has shown that receiving a qualified opinion or disclaimer is often the first step most federal agencies have had to take to before they really understand where the focus of their audit remediation efforts need to be. Like almost every action DoD takes, its audit will be the single largest audit ever undertaken. In addition to large, the audit will be complex because DoD's operations span our nation's history, while the focus on audit readiness is relatively recent. Unlike most companies undergoing an audit for the first time, DoD isn't audit ready. The difference between the initial audit readiness of DoD and most large companies stem from the drive for profit. The profit drive ingrains in private sector personnel that without financial managers' input to key business decisions, they don't have adequate understanding of the availability of resources to carry out their operations. That nature hasn't been part of the government's way of doing business. They just assume the funding will come. While changing today's past practices are slow, the financial statements still reflect transactions from the past. So often, obtaining that clean opinion for the first few years is unrealistic. Just as expectations of audit readiness should be managed, it should also be ensured that realistic deadlines are imposed. In a publicly traded company, auditors are in an organization every quarter, and then they have 90 days at the end of the fiscal year to complete the financial statement audit. Within the federal government, agencies have up to 45 days after the end of the year to complete and submit their audited statements to OMB. In my view, it's simply impractical to subject an organization as complex to DoD to this unreasonable deadline for the first few years that they are subjected to the audit, especially when the publicly traded counterparts that are smaller and less complex have twice as long to accomplish the same tasks. Another challenge is DoD's reliance on a complex web of service providers. Service providers perform financial management functions such as transaction processing and systems maintenance. In carrying out the functions, DoD agencies assume the service providers have proper internal controls, while service providers rightly assume that the policies and procedures are residing within the agencies. An effective manner for DoD to actually gain that assurance instead of having to assume is to have the service provider's internal controls audited by an independent party. But it might surprise the panel members to know that DoD service providers aren't subjected to that audit like the service providers in other agencies. In addition, DoD agencies and service providers need a detailed agreement that documents what the service providers are supposed to do for the agencies. That lack of agreement results in poor controls and injects risk in every transaction. Internal controls within DoD agencies themselves are also weak, and it's another challenge that they face. The organization as large and complex as DoD, they need a uniform approach to internal controls that would greatly enhance their financial management. The DoD controls environment is often far from standard, resulting in a decentralized, ineffective financial management environment. Without a uniform approach, it's difficult to share and adopt lessons learned in all DoD agencies and service providers. The 2,200-plus business systems that DoD relies on to perform its financial management is another challenge. This would be difficult enough with such systems under some standardization. Unfortunately, consistent policies on data processing and management are not in place. In my view, there are situations where DoD should not go back and undo the sins of the past. When a proper justification can be made, certain old transactions recorded in the financial systems would far outweigh their benefits. But standards and policies and procedures need to be in place to govern systems and the data that they maintain for current and future transactions. Human capital is another major challenge throughout the federal government. The chain of command and defense community adds complexity to that challenge. Financial management officials at headquarters often have no indirect or no authority over the financial management officials in the field. In addition, those field managers have more loyalty to their commanders than to the headquarters level staff. This lack of financial management chain of command makes it difficult to apply consistent financial management policies and procedures. I've discussed the challenges to audit readiness as requested, and though they are many, the talent and energy being invested by DoD as improved financial management is unprecedented. With DoD's continued leadership and attention and the support and pressure applied by panels such as this one, I'm sure we will soon be reminiscing about just how steep the climb was at one time. That concludes my opening statement, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. Mr. Keeley.
Chairman Conaway, Ranking Member Andrews, and members of the panel. It is a pleasure to be here today to share my perspectives about the impediments to the Department of Defense achieving audit readiness and the actions the DoD needs to take to become audit ready. My own audit readiness perspectives come from 27 years of public accounting experience as a licensed CPA, including 20 years in the private sector and 7 years working here with the DoD. My experience is primarily in information systems auditing, but I will also offer an informed opinion today, to the extent that I am able, on broad audit readiness matters within the DoD. The firm in which I am a partner, PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP, has performed first-time audits of several federal government departments and DoD entities, including the financial statement audit of the United States Army Corps of Engineers, Civil Works, the financial statement audit of an intelligence community agency, and the service organization audit of the Defense Information Systems Agency. In addition, PwC has been providing audit readiness advice to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller, Financial Improvement and Audit Readiness Directorate, FIRE, for the past 3 years. In this capacity, I have assisted with the development and implementation of the FIRE guidance and helped develop and teach the FIRE Directorate's 3-day audit readiness professional development course to over 1,000 DoD professionals, including financial leaders. Most recently, I signed the unqualified examination opinion on the successful audit readiness of the Air Force Fund Balance of Treasury reconciliation process. As I was preparing my testimony today, I happened to visit the Department of Energy. The lobby of the department headquarters contains a prominent display about the Manhattan Project and the role of Albert Einstein. The display reminded me of a quotation by Albert Einstein that is relevant to today's topic. We cannot solve the problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created the problems. The DoD did not intend to create the audit readiness challenges it has today. Rather, the DoD developed and implemented processes and systems tailored to achieve its overall functional mission. Audit readiness then became an imperative. Because the DoD's incumbent processes and systems were not originally designed to meet audit readiness, a new kind of thinking will be required for the DoD to address the requirements of an audit-ready organization. Since the CFO Act was passed in 1990, one of the most significant changes in audit readiness thinking that has already occurred in the DoD is the development and implementation of a financial improvement and audit readiness strategy. Rather than attempt to audit an entire component all at once, the strategy prioritizes financial improvement work into manageable waves of audit activity, such as the Statement of Budgetary Resources. The work ethic of DoD personnel is strong, and the DoD can accomplish any goal that it sets for itself. The 60-day SBR plans that are currently being developed by each component will soon provide detailed blueprints for how the DoD will meet the latest audit readiness deadlines. Based on PwC's experience, the DoD should continue to improve its financial management and audit readiness efforts in 3 ways. First, enhance the skills of personnel resources through the addition of certified public accountants who have financial statement audit experience, and also continue to implement the Secretary of Defense Comptroller's Financial Improvement and Audit Readiness Professional Development Program, as well as the Financial Management Certification Program. Number 2, ensure that functional leaders and financial leaders throughout the DoD, including the leaders of components as well as shared service organizations, are held equally accountable for audit readiness. Third, ensure legacy or ERP systems are configured to report data in the financial statements as prescribed by generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. I would be pleased to expand further on these 3 main areas during the question and answer period, and I thank you again for the opportunity to share my perspectives.
Well, thank you very much. It does occur to me that this may be one of the few times we have 5 CPAs. There may be some in the audience as well. Any CPAs in the audience? Oh, wow, 7. Steve and I are CPAs as well, so I want to get that on there, just a personal plug. And I'm wearing my CPA cufflinks too, by the way, Rob.
My American flag.
Okay. Todd, you're on 5 minutes.
Well, I am not a CPA, so didn't understand all the CPA humor, but I appreciate everyone being here this morning. I was particularly interested, Ms. Porter, in your comments related to internal controls and the internal control environment within DoD, but also outside. The various stakeholders and service providers that DoD has. I don't know how many entities provide services to DoD, but quite a large number, I suspect. To your knowledge, are any of those audited with respect to their internal control processes and procedures right now? Something that you recommended we start doing?
Within DoD, there are 2, I believe, current SAS, they're called SAS 70 or SSA 16 audits. They're the audits of the internal controls of the service providers. I believe DISA has one, and DFAS has an audit, but not as a service provider. There's one more. DECA?
That's right.
DSIPS. DSIPS also has one.
But if I understood in your testimony, you actually think that we should engage in more audits,
Absolutely.
Broader audits, more regular audits
Of the service providers.
of those entities.
Yes.
That would seem to result in a great expansion of all the audit activity of DoD, which may well be justified, may be necessary, to your mind. Are there some examples you can think of where, had we conducted audits of these service providers, it would have mitigated some challenges that we're now experiencing?
The service providers operate the systems that cut across all the military departments. So I'll give you an example. In the Marine Corps, DFAS actually processes the transactions for the United States Marine Corps out of one of their locations. A lot of the information that and the challenges that occurred during that audit, DFAS is taking those lessons learned and moving them across the rest of their organization. Had those audits of that service provider happened prior to the Marine Corps audit, there would have been a more consistent and advance notice of those types of improvements that needed to be made before the Marine Corps audit got underway. The other part to think about is each time that a service provider, so let's say that the Army goes under audit tomorrow, DFAS still has to be audited by the Army auditors as well, because there's not this independent report that each of the auditors of the military services can look at and rely on.
I see. Okay. You also spoke, Ms. Porter, to the some human capital, unique human capital challenges that our armed services face in light of the formal chain of command and then their duties, which are within the realm, in some cases, of financial management. So some people following the marching orders of those in the field, others listening to those up at command. That seems like a pretty great challenge. Is that unique, however, to the military? I mean, within the private sector, we have business units and we have, all sorts of different boxes and different people to look to. I guess I'm trying to get a sense of why this is a unique challenge to the military. Maybe you could speak to that. If I understand the problem, maybe we can come up with a better way to address it.
I think the problem is unique to the military because the functional leaders, both at the command level, don't understand how they actually play into the overall financial management role. They don't understand how what they do in making their purchases and the acceptance of like a receiver report at the field level really has an overall implication up to the financial statements themselves. And I think that the command level financial managers understand there is a standard set of policies and procedures, but what happens when they're down there is they get implemented in a way that works for them, which isn't necessarily the standardization across all the department.
It seems like that challenge could be one experienced by private sector entities, though, right? And if so, how is it typically addressed there?
I think the challenge could be addressed there, but it's mitigated because the auditors are in with all parts of the organization and have been for years. So everybody understands their role and what they do to get to those audited numbers. And right now, this is all foreign to DOD.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Andrews.
Thank you. I thank the witnesses. Mr. Keeley, you tell a story in your testimony about a payroll audit requiring 8,000 hours in 1 year and then 400 hours the next year because of technological improvements that were made. And that's in the context of your assessment of the ERB situation generally. Given what you know about the progress or lack thereof the ERP systems, how do you think we're doing, and what suggestions might you make for us to expedite the process and improve the quality?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. From my perspective, auditors are systems agnostic. So the fire guide itself speaks to the need for the components to improve legacy systems or ERP solutions. So the aspects that an auditor looks for in any system is that the transactions are processed in accordance with GAAP. They capture and retain transaction data so that it can be traced to the financial statements, and the transactions are maintained in a reliable computer environment. The example I used in my written testimony regarding the 8,000 items, or the 8,000 hours that it took to test the 800 items, really comes from the spectrum of control that we need to achieve within the systems environment, both legacy systems and the ERP. And I've spoken to this point many times at the Fire Directorate and elsewhere throughout the components. Based on all my years as a systems auditor, the controls that are most required for an information system are logical security and programming. If a component can prove to me that direct access to programs and data is well secured, that component is well on its way to achieving at least some reliance on
Based
control.
upon your knowledge of the ERPs that are in various stages of development, how do we stack up against that criterion? Are we going to be able to meet it?
Yeah, my experience looking at the criteria is that the ERPs are first focused on functionality. So it's perfectly normal when you develop an ERP system to make sure it works. That's what the Department of Defense has been primarily focused on. From my experience, the controls that I spoke to in terms of logical security and program are often implemented after the functionality is addressed. So from my perspective, the view of controls and the testing of logical security programming and operations needs to happen much more quickly. It should be happening at the front end, in the middle, and at the end. From what I've seen, that is not happening.
Now, Ms. Porter, you make reference to the SSAE number 16 standards, which I think you say are lacking in a lot of the service provider areas. What kind of changes would the service providers have to adopt in order to comply with the SSAE number 16 standards?
The first step in the process would be to actually have those systems and their processes as a service provider be examined under those standards. Right now, there's very few. There's one that was recently awarded that is underway right now on the civilian pay process, but that would be the first step.
But what do you think that those examinations would likely yield, and what changes would those examinations likely provoke?
They would yield where there are deficiencies in the controls around the information systems and the transaction processing that those systems take place. And the hopeful result that would come out of that would be there would be changes made to those systems that would have an impact across all the military services and would get them one step closer to having that production of data at the transaction level.
Do you think those changes could likely be achieved with existing resources, or would they require new resources for those service providers?
think with a proper level of understanding and training, I think they could be accomplished with the service providers that are in place today. I think they're definitely dedicated to making those things happen.
Yeah, we think so too. We're encouraged by it. Now, Ms. Patel, you sat on both sides of the equation here, your service within the Department of Defense as well as on the outside. And you claim, and I think you're right, that increasing the number of CPAs that we have is an essential priority. Do you think that we have a compensation structure within the federal service that will facilitate that goal, or won't it?
Oh, I think the compensation structure is fine. There's a lot of opportunities to incentivize people to come on board. So I think if they take advantage of the what's available to them to actually target CPAs, perhaps sign-up bonuses, training opportunities, and things like that, I think that they can attract strong CPAs into the workforce.
We've attracted 7 of them here this morning, so that's a very good sign. I also just wanted to comment about the ERPs that I'm going to thank the chairman and Chairman McKeon and Ranking Member Smith. In response to our last hearing about some concerns the GAO had raised about the ERPs, Chairman Conaway and the other members I mentioned, along with myself, assigned a letter November 8th to the GAO asking that the GAO update its work on the ERPs by the 31st of December if they could. So what deadline are we using?
31st of March.
The 31st of March, I'm sorry, I'm always an optimist. So that we would have available to us their work, so as we deliberate on the FY13 bill, we'd have that. So I want to thank the chairman for his cooperation in that letter, and thank you for writing it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. Stevie?
Well, good morning. And for Todd, I'm not going to say any CPA jokes because he just doesn't get our humor. But if y'all could, and I guess we'll just start with Ms. Battelle and just go to the right. And, I'm interested in knowing, I was going to talk about ERPs, and as a CPA myself, I've been through the ERP process, not at the level of the DOD audit. So I was going to talk on that, but what I wanted to see is, you know, there's been some dates out there. We're supposed to achieve audit readiness by 2017. Then all of a sudden, Secretary Panetta came out and said, we can do this by 2014. Then all of a sudden, there's some, you know, there's an article where for another $1 billion, we could do it by 2017. So in y'all's opinion, I want to, what is a true, accurate date? You know, where do you think we're actually going to be able to achieve audit readiness? What are some of the most important factors in preparing us for audit achievability, and any weaknesses and strengths along the way? And you can expand or summarize however you want.
A question that's been asked for years, right? And I think that until the business leaders become more engaged in fixing the business processes and systems, that the progress is not going to be made as aggressively as it needs to. So to the point of what needs to be done besides leadership involvement, I think there's something to be said for the ERPs, but to build the ERPs off of standard processes, standard data, they need to focus more on the business enterprise architecture in the department, a wonderful tool that would allow them to build the processes so that there's one place of truth for how to do business with the department or within the department, and would allow them then to test all of the ERPs that are being developed against that one standard truth. So I think that would certainly help, but I do think that the biggest challenge is getting the owners of the processes. So again, whether you're talking about a payroll transaction, you're talking about receipt of goods or services, you're talking about issuing inventory, transporting equipment, material, all of those are business processes, and those transactions are the type of transactions where the impediments are. And so to fix them, to meet audit criteria, is what should be the major focus going on in the department.
Just real quickly, 2017 or 2014,
So,
or somewhere in between?
I actually think 2014 is very aggressive. If I just think that's very aggressive, given all of the details that they need to work. But somewhere between 2014 and 2017, I think should be doable if they put the resources and the attention on it that's needed.
Thank you. Ms. Porter?
I would agree with Ms. Butel that you need that sustained leadership to continue, and you need that leadership to get out to the field level so that they really do understand what their role is in the overall financial management process. The other thing I think that's going to be key to this is transaction level detail, regardless of where that transaction level detail comes from, because you can't do an audit without it. And the other thing that you need is the documentation that's going to support the transaction level detail. If you put all of those things together, you can achieve the 2014 and the 2017 goal with the right amount of focus and the right sustainment across the department.
Congressman, I have 2 points to make on this topic. From my perspective, the first one is methodology. In order to achieve the date, the methodology has to be ingrained throughout the department. In the FIRE methodology, it's very straightforward and basic. We need to identify and document financial processes, test internal controls, test documentation, find gaps, and correct them. The most important aspect right now is testing. We've spent a lot of time documenting processes, and I've seen volumes of them, and people are documenting everything they do that's critical to the mission, and that's very important. We need to extract the financial aspects and get down to testing. That's my first point. The second point I'd mention is the skill of the people to apply this approach. People are definitely hardworking, and there's a strong work ethic throughout DOD, but it comes down to judgment. When you look at workarounds in an ERP solution, how you're going to test that workaround, it comes down to pure judgment, and that only comes from experience. The word judgment appears in the Government Accountability Office Financial Audit Manual and the Yellow Book of Government and Audit Standards 270 times out of 1,300 pages. So judgment is critical to being able to test and execute and achieve the 2014 date.
I'm out of time. I yield back.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Ms. Porter, you mentioned flesh out just for the record, the impact of having the service providers be audited by each of because the service providers don't have their own audit that other accountants can rely upon. Each of the various entities would, in effect, have to come in and audit that service provider itself. Can you walk us through why it would be less expensive audit hour-wise and cost to the taxpayer if those service providers had documentation audits that they could give to the various branches and other components that the auditors there could rely on?
What that means is that if those independent service provider audits are available, the auditors of the statements themselves of the service organizations could rely on that work. There would only be, as long as that service provider audit covered the right period of time. So I'll give you an example for the Marine Corps. If DFAS had a service provider audit that covered the last 9 months of the fiscal year, we would not have had to go into the DFAS to look at their controls or look at the controls of the systems that they operate, such as the Defense Civilian Pay System or the Defense Cash Accountability System. Instead, we could have used the audit of that service provider and relied upon that report. That's assuming that that service provider's report was an unqualified opinion or that it identified where the weaknesses were, because then what that would allow us to do is then focus back into the department what were the mitigating controls that they had in place to compensate for the weaknesses of the service provider.
Right. Mr. Kelly, you mentioned the other day in a conversation that, or today, in fact, that you're systems agnostic, it was your phrase. You flesh that out in the sense of you can audit if the controls are there, no matter what the system, whether it's an ERP or a hand-posted set of books. If the controls are there, you can audit that. Would you kind of walk us through that what you had meant by that?
Yes, the controls need to be there. What we often find, and I'll use an example of what I've seen in the field, is the earlier testimony you've received about ERPs talks about 2,200 or so systems throughout the DoD. Now, auditors are not afraid of size, so we can go in and look at the systems that need to be audited. But one aspect of the ERP solutions is to consolidate the data so that you don't have duplication of data. One area of systems that causes a great deal of problem in an audit when you have data in duplicate systems. The auditor doesn't know which to choose. And so when working with business folks, if the business folks have data in a legacy system and an ERP system, it's difficult to first reconcile that information and then nail down a population. We spend a great deal of time identifying the absolute population upon which we can test. And if we can't identify the population, we cannot move forward. So less may be more in the case of the ERP consolidation, so I applaud the effort. But that's much more of a business decision. I do not want an audit to impede the DoD's warfighting mission. If you need 2,000 systems to achieve the mission, I can audit it. So it's a matter of determining how much reliance I can place on that system. And the Financial Information Systems Audit Manual has 424 points to it. We all, as auditors, apply judgment to those points, and we can address primarily half of them to get you at least some reliance on internal controls and be much more efficient using judgment.
And that reliance on internal controls, just for the record, drove the drop in audit hours from 8,000 audit hours to 400 audit hours in that previous example.
That's a perfect example. If we go from no reliance on a system, because, for instance, if security is not locked down, to at least some reliance, the change in substantive testing is exponential.
All right. Ms. Boutel, based on your experience, we talk about the workforce and the need for CPAs with a specific background in either financial statement audit or financial statement preparations. We've got a lot of folks, CPAs, in the system now. Is it all or none? Do you have to hire these folks from the outside totally, or can you cross-train or retrain or help get experience for the folks who are already in the team, who know the way that things are going on to help get them the skills necessary to be able to fill some of those slots that are lacking?
So I think that they could work side by side with trained audit professionals. I think that the three firms here at the table have people on board helping in different places in DoD. I think if they paired up some of their CPAs with the folks working audit readiness, or even the audits, and they worked closely. They had a defined approach for how they would do that. I think that the experience gained by the current CPAs in the government would enhance their capability to help the department move forward. I do think that, you know, I'm a CPA, having spent most of my time in the government, and I am not as proficient in audit as these two colleagues next to me. You know, I have lots of wonderful audit practitioners back at Deloitte that I've learned a lot from in the 7 years that I've been there. So I do think that bringing in more seasoned audit practitioners to help guide the approach, and then letting the folks within the government learn from them, would be a doable approach.
Thanks. We're going to have time for another round. Rob?
I really don't have another round of questions at this time.
Okay. Todd, Scott, or Steve? Ms. Porter, the real-world example you're giving us about publicly held companies produce quarterly financial statements, and your firm is in their shop on some level of engagement with those quarterly reports, but that's not happening in the federal. Is there a similar process that could go on in the Department of Defense, in this example, that would shorten the time frame needed to close out the books in November? Or, I mean, is there a way to look at what you do in the private sector with those quarterly reviews that you do, and the impact it has on the year-end audits? Could that same model work in some altered form at in a federal agency?
Well, first, let me say I'm not advocating quarterly reports for the federal government. I really don't want to be on the record of saying that, because everyone will
No,
not.
that was not confused at all.
But what I think that does is it adds a discipline and an exposure to the auditors that the DoD hasn't experienced so far, because they're in there having the conversations, they're having discussions around what are your management controls that you use. And this is where it's not the auditors that are driving what the civilian agencies or even the commercial entities are doing. Management understands what they need to operate their business from a control perspective, and the auditors figure out how to use that information to get what they need to conduct the audit, to give management the feedback back as to whether they're using accurate financial information to make their decisions. It's been from a DoD and a government perspective for years. But proprietary accounts weren't looked at. They only focused on the budgetary sides of the transactions. And that was often driven by what overseers were asking them to report back up on. So as they've tried to get themselves in tune to both sides of the transactions, the budgetary and the proprietary side, there's been a learning curve. And sometimes that learning curve has been impeded by not having the true understanding of what level of detail, what an auditor actually looks for, and they don't have that in the commercial entities because they're so involved with each other all the time.
All right. Mr. Key, any comments in regard to that?
No.
Well, just that interim field work being done more regularly throughout the year, would that reduce the number of total audit hours? I mean, one of the things we're obviously going to, at some point in time, get to a running rate in which the controls are in place, the systems are working, and the sustainability of the audits year in and year out is going to be the key. That first audit, you can't maintain the level of intensity to get to that first audit year after year after year after year, I don't think. So once you've got this thing running, what would be the role of the auditors during the normal process?
Well, yes, Congressman. My view is that continuous auditing has always been a bit of an enigma, even in the private sector. Yes, auditors are in the field, and we can do early substantive testing. But from my experience in the private sector, 7 years before I came down here, the private sector companies have teams of specialized accountants. They have tax departments with tax accountants. They have statutory accountants focused on compliance reporting, and then they have GAAP accountants. So they have entire teams in the field, supplemented, of course, with internal audit. And they work at the companies, they're the company's employees. Our auditors, to the extent we can interact with them throughout the year and actually perform the testing I was talking about, definitely expedites the audit. And there are accounting standards and rules that allow us to perform early testing and still rely on it for the year end. So it's definitely difficult to do, but it is done throughout the community.
Right. Ms. Boutel, I've got one more question for Ms. Porter, but first, Ms. Boutel, given your experience in both sides of the shop, is there a way to create a chain of command responsibility at Department of Defense other than have whoever the current Secretary of Defense is saying day after day after day, get this done? In other words, Kevin, Bob Hale has, or the Assistant Secretary of State / Comptroller really doesn't have command reach into all these other places. So given that org chart that's in place, and we're not going to make a lot of changes to it, is there a way that we could get to a point or a system that holds all the folks at the various levels accountable for making sure this gets done, so that, any thoughts on that?
I think I think with the Secretary's involvement, and whoever the Secretary is going forward has to be involved, I think that will send a very strong message. Now, I understand that the reality is that the Secretary is not going to meet with the business owners on a monthly basis, most likely, but some periodic forum would be beneficial. The Chief Management Officer and the Deputy Chief Management Officer, I think, having responsibility for the business processes, the systems, would also be a very strong marriage between those two roles, the CMO and the DCMO, with Bob Hale, and driving this, that maybe between the two of them. I know Beth McGrath has got a tremendous knowledge of the systems and the processes. I think coming together with Bob Hale, they make a pretty formidable team. They've got to have the power, though, to direct changes within the business areas. And without that, they cannot be as successful as they need to be.
Right. Ms. Porter, I can't let you off the hook. what can you share with us, if anything, about the Marine Corps audit? That, and you may not be able to talk to us about this year's Marine Corps audit, but can you share with us a perspective on the difference between where the Marine Corps was this time last year and where the Marine Corps is today, without telegraphing too much what's going to happen shortly? But can you? I couldn't let you off the hook.
Sure. So last year's audit in fiscal year 10, we had a big struggle at the beginning of the audit. We didn't get very far into the testing beyond beginning balances. We basically tested no current year transactions. For the fiscal year 11 audit, well, let me go back to fiscal year 10. There was also quite a few findings and recommendations that came out of the audit that the Marine Corps started immediately to undertake remediation actions to while the audit was still underway. In fiscal year 11, you could see that there was an improvement in the process. They better understood what we were looking for. They were better able to produce reconciliations and tie-outs of data that we had a big struggle with in the previous year. It's not perfect because they still had some struggles this year. We thought it might be a little bit better, but they are moving in the right direction. We've also got to a lot more current year testing this year than we did in the past. So you definitely see that they are becoming more accustomed to understanding what we're looking for. We're also becoming more accustomed to how they do business and what documentation they have. And so I see progress every year. And I also see them taking those lessons learned to the other services.
All right. The recommendations, typically in a commercial entity, you give a set of financial statements. You also give them a statement of weakness of internal controls, all those kinds of things. Did you see adequate remediation for the stuff that you discovered in the 2010 audit? The Marine Corps without any specific details, but make adequate process at addressing those weaknesses and moving as far as you thought they could move in the time they had to move it?
We issued two different sets of findings and recommendations to the Marine Corps last year, one associated with information technology and one associated with the financial statement controls themselves. For the information technology piece, we did see quite a bit of changes and were able to test those actions that they took last year. And before we had to cut off testing, I would say there's probably another 20 to 30% of them that are ready to be tested right now, that the action actually took place after we stopped testing. For the financial statement findings, it's a little more difficult to address because we haven't yet been able to conduct the test of the current year transactions which associated with those findings, which would actually, in fact, tell us whether the remediation actions worked.
All right. Okay. Rob, other questions?
Well, just as a concluding comment, I think Ms. Porter's limited sneak preview of the Marine Corps audit, which shows reason for optimism, and the Chairman's question about sustaining the progress we've made beyond this Secretary of Defense, I think are the core, is the core challenge facing this panel. I think Secretary Panetta deserves enormous praise for giving this effort such a high priority. But there will be another Secretary of Defense soon. There always is.
Maybe even another president.
Maybe, that's right. And whether there's another president or this one, there's secretaries do change. And I do think that our key mission is to try to build into the culture of the institution and the structure of the institution a high priority on this audit readiness. Because if we have to rely upon the leadership priorities of the person who's going to be secretary, I just don't think we're ever going to achieve what we need to do because, priorities come and go. So Mike and I, the Chairman and I have talked about this before. I think all members of the panel and members of the public should be thinking about advice they could give us on institutionalizing the progress that we've seen right now. I think very much of that is attributable to the Chairman's focus, laser-like focus on this issue for several years, and on Secretary Panetta's admirable response to that. But we want to make this a principle that extends beyond individuals to a more embedded culture in the organization. However we can do that, I think we'll make great progress. And I do appreciate the contribution of the three witnesses here this morning. Thank you.
Well, I want to echo Rob's praise of Secretary Panetta, unprecedented forward leap in commitment to this issue, and I'm really tickled to death he's made that. Just quickly, just kind of maybe a yes or no, have we got enough forward momentum toward this goal that this is actually going to happen? In other words, can we, if there's we get beyond that tipping point where, yeah, it's going to be hard, and yes, it's going to be, it may take a while, but have we got past that point where we really are going to make this happen, in y'all's perspective? Mark?
Yes, sir, I believe so. One of the topics I talked about in my testimony was the lessons learned. So we have a great deal of lessons learned from the Marine Corps, from the Army Corps, from DISA, and others. And we are always looking back at those lessons and applying them going forward. So applying the lessons and speeding the training and momentum is certainly achievable.
Okay. Tracy, your perspective?
I do think the goals are there. I think the sustainment across the department at the lower levels so that it doesn't go away when the Secretary changes is critical to make this leap forward that they're trying to get to. So with that right amount of focus and with those lessons continuing to be learned and nobody backing off from that progress and just keeping that pressure on, because you take the pressure of the audit readiness or the pressure of the audit off, the way things work right now aren't yet well ingrained in everybody within the services, so they will immediately fall back to their old way of doing business. So you have to just keep this pressure and this momentum in order to keep us going in the direction that they need to go.
Joanne, your comments?
I agree with Ms. Porter. I think that that you have to keep the pressure on. I think that the momentum is there. It's moving. You've brought tremendous attention to this topic, but there's ways for them to go for the business owners to truly embrace and understand their responsibility. So again, I think that they can make it if you keep the pressure on them.
All right. Well, thank you three. I appreciate the witnesses today, and we did not telegraph you that questions. We try to make sure this panel keeps existing or what. No, one of our big issues is how do we put in place the right kind of attention at the committee so that when Rob and I are doing something else or going somewhere else, that pressure and that commitment from our side, the oversight piece, remains in place in an appropriate manner to make sure we do our part of that. Again, thank the witnesses for being here this morning. We're adjourned.